so because we were so involved in school in Missouri, because we were on the cheer squad, we were in orchestra,
Choir.
there were consequences if you got caught drinking or
Or going to
smoking or going to
parties where there's
parties.
stuff
Like
that
there's consequences and you would get benched and stuff. So that was a very big fear of ours
so
when
we
we would get
never
invited to stuff. So we never really
went to parties out of fear.
and when we would and we heard that there was alcohol there, I just remember just calling to my
Texting our
mom
mom.
and saying, "Hey, can you just come pick us up?" Like just secretly, like, "Hey, can you pick us up?" And then making up a lie to the person who was having a party, like, "Hey, I gotta go. Like, I have
Mhm.
something tomorrow," or like
Yeah.
I had a long
Yeah.
day, and
It
so
was
just to like not seem uncool for
Mhm.
leaving because there was something there.
But I will say that we were never when we lived in Missouri, we were never peer pressured at parties. We never experienced that in, like, the normal sense. But
Got
when we moved out here to LA and we were immersed into Hollywood lifestyle, and, like, because we were influencers at 16, we were being invited to YouTube parties.
Yeah.
At 16, 17, we were going to these ginormous house parties, which I would assume were similar to, like, frat parties.
Mhm.
Um, we even then, we didn't necessarily experience peer pressure because what would happen is because I didn't have my first sip of alcohol till I was 21.
Got
Same.
it.
And what would happen is at these parties, people would say, "Hey, do you want a drink? Do you want to take a shot?" And I'd say, "Oh, I don't drink." And for the most part,
Everyone's
everyone was very respectful of our decisions to not drink. I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, I don't drink. I'm not old enough." And they're like, "You have never had a sip?" I'm like, "No, I'm going to wait." And they're like, "Okay." But there were those times where people would either pressure us to like, "Hey, you should try this," or "You've never smoked, like, you should just try this." And it's just like, no, no, you have to really stand your ground. And eventually that person ends up feeling stupid for pressuring you over and over again. If you're just like really nice to them and explain, like, "Hey, this is why I'm not doing this. Please stop. Like, it's making
Yeah.
me uncomfortable."
Yeah.
Um, and when you tell someone like it's making me uncomfortable, like I just don't do that, then they're gonna feel like, oh, I done messed up. I'm sorry.
or you give them a story that's like very because part of the reason why we didn't want to drink before we turned 21 or anything is we have a alcoholism in our family. It kind of runs through our family.
Mhm.
And so
The addictive gene runs in our
we
family.
had a couple of family members pass away because of that, like for liver problems and stuff. And so we would just tell those people that, and then they would feel really bad right away. And then they'd be like,
They'd
"Oh,
be like,
okay, like,
"Oh, I
sorry, sorry, sorry."
respect that." And it was just
Yeah.
like and more so it was like, this is something I just don't want to take a part in right now. I don't want to become addicted to something that has caused issues in my family.
Yeah.
And they're like,
That's such
"Oh."
a good point. And I feel like
Mhm.
also the first thing that you were saying about in Missouri, like having all the extracurriculars, I feel like, I mean, you should be honest with people and they should respect you the first time, but also you can say like, hey, I have, my football or I have my dance or whatever, like I can't. And
Mhm.
I think people also, that's like a good way out. If
It
you
is it's definitely a good way out, or even nowadays, because I'm not much of a drinker,
Mhm.
I just don't really like to do it, but I will say, "I'll DD, I'll be the driver, I'll be
Yeah,
the
there you
designated
go. We
driver."
always need that.
Yeah,
Um,
and so, I like to make sure everyone is safe, and so I'll just volunteer, and that's my way out of even drinking nowadays, because people
yeah.
will be like, "Hey, Vanessa, take us," like, we'll be at Saddle Ranch before quarantine, we'll be
We'll
at
be at
Saddle Ranch,
Saddle Ranch, no
and
biggie.
and people will be like, "Vanessa, take a shot or get a drink." I'm like, "I'm driving," and they're like, "Oh," and it's just and like that's just a no brainer. Like, don't give the person who's
Mhm.
driving
I think
alcohol.
there's a lot to say though with if your friends are drinking and stuff, you can still be friends with them
Yeah.
as long as they respect your decision.
Mhm.
Exactly.
If they're disrespecting you and pressuring you to continue to do things you don't want, and not necessarily drinking or smoking, but just like even activities that may be illegal or just like something you're not comfortable with, and they know you're not comfortable with doing, you need to stand your ground and either tell them like, "Hey, stop," or unfortunately find new friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just very hard to in high school to just to come to that conclusion that I need new friends
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
high school could be lonely and hard.